All right, time to get to this 78 Marshall 2204. So we want to change out these two caps in the bias supply. We want to change out these diodes. In order to pull this board up and lift it up, we're going to have to disconnect these wires most likely, and we'll need to take the pots off the front panel. But because we're going to be making some changes to the ground scheme, I'm going to go ahead and start by removing this bus wire across the back of the pots because it is not doing us any favors. So this is going to seem really brute force, but this can all be put back. It's just bus wire. There's nothing really that special about what they used. I could recreate this, but we won't want to. So I'm doing some cuts right by these wires. So I'll be able to slide those wires and these connections here off the bus wire in just a minute. So let's see. Look at the ones that are the low-hanging fruit first. Making sure I don't touch these pink wires or anything else and burn something. All right, that one's not playing along, so cutting between the two components there so I can get that little snippet of wire out here. And I know you can't see everything I'm doing because my hands get in the way. And I just can't do I don't have 4 cameras. B, I can't do a 4-camera setup because they'd be blocking my view of everything. So I think it's pretty intuitive what I'm doing here. Right now, I've got one little snippet of wire in the looped end of this resistor lead. And I'm just going to use this braid to get that solder out of it. And it's pretty tight there, so I will manually get that out in a minute. Go ahead and desolder around this other loop on the cap lead. If I can get the line up. I'm going to cut that little bit of wire sticking out on this side of the bus wire, not the lead of the component. Hopefully this one will slide off. Usually they slide, but these are on here really tight. That one slid off. I'll revisit that in a minute. Let me get this bus wire off here. All right, those are the only really tricky bits. The rest of it goes pretty easy. I'm going to slide these wires off before I take that one off the back of the pot. All right. Now this bit of bus wire over here on the volume pot is doing a loop that's actually going through here, so I'm going to trim it right there. All right, when I have these pots out of here, I'll clean up the excess and make it all neat. And the places where I'll make new solder connections or redoing the solder connections, I'll get the old stuff off and make sure it's a good clean connection surface to surface before I do that. And when this pot is off, I'll be reattaching these two components to the pot shell itself. But now I won't have a bus wire to deal with when I put it back together. And these wires can be put just to the back of a pot. So there's still a very good solid ground connection so long as the pots are on there tight. and the mating surface between the pot and the chassis is clean, but we won't have that ground eddy current potential with multiple paths to ground of varying lengths and varying resistances. That's the problem with the bus wire. Now we'll take these knobs off, and it's a small flathead screw, and I want to make sure that the screw pretty much precisely fits these openings and the screw slots. I don't want to damage the screws, and I don't want to chew up the plastics. So this is the slightly large one. Let's see if it fits. Yeah, perfect. On some others, I'll have to go to the next size down. Let's see if I can get these nuts for the input jacks off by hand. Oh, they're good and tight. All right. Well, I have special tools for this, and well, my metric ones for these nuts I've not been able to find. I need to order a new set of the metric bicycle repairman's stuff. I've got my Imperial stuff. So I will very carefully do this. Doesn't take a lot of force, so I just need to get them started. Then I can do them by hand. And I'm really going slow because I don't want it to slip and then down the metal. Ask me how I learned about that. No, wait, don't. It's a sad, sad tale. The young would-be tech a long time ago. So once they're loose enough, then I do the rest by hand, and I'll only do the final tightening with the tool. Now these, it's much the same. Make sure it's a precise fit. And I'm making sure that I'm making good contact with the nut, but my tool is not actually touching the control panel. Now I need to find where I have my metric set of bicycle wrenches, because they can go parallel to the surface and there's much less risk of damaging anything. But as long as I'm very, very careful and patient, this does the job just fine. Thank you very much. It's all about intent and focus. I'm just going to loosen all of them, then do them all by hand. I'm sure there's some Yoda quote that applies. But while I'm talking to you about this, and I'm aware of what I'm saying, and that people are listening to this, and I'm aware of the lighting and the focus and all that, my mind really is focused on what I am doing, where I am. Thanks, Yoda. Because if you slip and mar the panel, hatred, rage, anger, these are the dark side. All right, now on the back of each one of these pots is a black oxide tooth washer. I have found that for various reasons over time, these black oxide washers don't give as good a ground as a zinc coated. And I'm going to replace them with zinc coated. And it's a metal to metal reaction, because you have the brass and steel and sometimes aluminum material of the pots. So here's a brass shaft and bushing, and brass bushing, and you've got the steel or aluminum pot casing, and the steel of the inside of the chassis. And you have this other black oxide, and so you have three dissimilar metals all pressing up against each other, and dissimilar metals can have reactions. I'm not a metallurgist or metallurgist, depending on your preference. So I can't tell you all the whys, but I did look it up, and it's a real thing, even if I don't remember all the gory details. The best choice for one of these is stainless steel, but a stainless steel one is usually the hardest material of them, and you'll end up damaging the bushing of the pot. This one's got an aluminum bushing, for instance. The other one's got brass. So the regular silver-colored zinc ones are the way to go. So now everything that's coming off the front panel is off the front panel, and it's, I did not damage anything. There's a scratch here that was not mine, and I'm making sure that this front corner, I'm making sure that this isn't flopping up. On some Marshalls, once everything's off, the front panel starts to flap, in which case I put some low-tack blue painter's tape there just to hold it in place so it doesn't flap and get a bend in it somewhere. But this one feels good, won't be necessary, but it's something to be aware of. Now I'm going to point out something that's probably obvious to most people, but it's surprising how often I find these things coming back from, coming in, and other techs have been in there. Now I'm going to show you something which may seem obvious, but I've had so many of these come in where a previous tech forgot. This each has one washer. They originally would have had 2 washers, but 1 washer will suffice. The ones on the rear have 2, but the ones on the rear have the metal nuts. So maybe 1 washer was original on here. But people leave them out, or you'll have input jacks where one has 3 washers and one has 1 washer where they're both supposed to have 2. So when you take these jacks out of an old Marshall, look down to see if any of these fiber washers fell off, and take them off the jack and put them to the side, and don't forget about them, because if you leave them on here in the various course of the board flipping up over the next processes, they'll go flying across the room and you'll lose them and you'll forget about them. So keep these safe. I'm sorry my thumbnail is so dirty. I was doing some yard work this morning. I'm trying to get my thumbnail back for guitar. That little flathead screwdriver does a good job of cleaning my nail. I won't show that on camera. That's gross. All right, now we're going to remove the little bitty brass nuts and the little tooth washers for each standoff. There are 6 in total on these Marshalls. I've got a little 5mm nut, and I have a tool that fits this, but usually I can do that by hand. All right, these are on there really tight, so we'll go to the tool, at least to start them. And just like every other screw I've shown and nut on, just like every other nut I've shown on the channel, when you start them back a little bit counterclockwise till you feel the grooves line up. And I always do most of the tightening by hand, just because the tool can exert more force. Get that one out of the way so that it's not blocking the camera. The tool can exert more force than the brass screw can bear, and so they can snap. So I only do them a little bit past finger tight when I'm putting them all back together, because I don't want them to snap. Again, ask me how I found that out. And trust the tooth washer to be your friend. So we can get those out by hand. And this is the point where you have to pay very close attention, because these little bitty parts, if they go flying across the room, you will never find them. Never, ever, ever, ever. Never, ever, ever. And then those, I'll show you my little trick for getting those washers up. I've got 2 tricks. I'll show you 2 variations. Not sure one of them will work. It depends on the material. I don't mean to be mysterious, but it will be obvious in just a moment. And for those of you who might think that doing amp repair is glamorous, it's a whole lot of this. It's my equivalent of Ted Woodford's polishing, polishing, polishing. Now, you can either lift the entire board very carefully at this point, which brings all the washers above the level of the screws, makes them easy to get, which is much easier typically than using your fingers because you can drop them very easily. I have this little tool magnetizer and demagnetizer. So I put a screwdriver in here that's magnetized. I can demagnetize it at this end, or I can magnetize it at this end. And if this is the right material, let's see if these are magnetic. Yeah, they're ferrous. Sometimes they'll just leap up onto it, but either way, gave me a good grip. There you go. Now we're living the dream. Let's see if I can get that in focus. And that makes my life so much easier when that happens. There we go. That one I can't quite get because of the fuse holder. See that fuse holder's proximity here? This is the HT fuse. That's why you never do this kind of work with the amp having any charge to the capacitors, because I would have probably zapped myself trying to do this right here. You think you're careful and you get sloppy and then you get zapped. Best to know that you cannot be zapped. All right. So now we have all the little brass nuts and the little black oxide tooth washers off the board. Put that carefully to the side. Now all the pots can be pulled up over on top of the board. Gently, but no real worries involved. And the board can come up, and I'm going to see if I have enough slack on this black and yellow wire to lift the board up as is, or whether I need to desolder these. Usually I have to desolder them, but not always. And this board's a nice tight fit on the screws, which is good. So you got to kind of guide it. All right, in this case, I'm very lucky. I'll be able to access the underside of the board to get to these components without desoldering anything off the board itself. I'll just have to be very careful not to burn any of these wires as I go on the bottom with the soldering iron. Now I can start to place these caps and these diodes, but what I don't want to do is just heat them up from the bottom and then yank them up, because these may have leads crimped over because these may have. Now I can get in here and start to remove and then replace these caps and these diodes. But what I don't want to do is just heat them from the bottom and yank them up. And I certainly don't want to try to heat them up from the top, because if these leads are bent over, as they usually are, the little film pads on the bottom, the copper foil on the bottom of these things is very fragile and very thin. It'll just tear all to hell and the traces will rip. So what I will do first is I will snip one end of each component where the lead meets the body. Some guys will just do a flush cut like that and then try to push it down. What I'm about to show you, I have found easier for me. It may not be easier for you, but it's easier for me. Oh, and take a note of which end of the electrolytics is positive and which end is negative before you remove them. These boards don't have it marked, but the positive is here and here, which is ground, which is confusing for a lot of people. But then, once I have all these leads cut on one side, I can bend the component up. And forgive me, I'm doing this with a camera between where my right arm would normally be and the work. So I'm doing this left-handed. I'm a bit clumsy. So I'll bend that end up, kind of straighten it out. And if I need to do this in batches, I'll do it in batches. So I'll do the 3 diodes that are most distant from me first. So that now when I go underneath and heat up the solder in these areas, I can push them down, and any little L hook that's there will come down. I can snip it flush, and the whole thing will fall out. Sometimes it just comes out with the heat from the soldering iron. So let's see how we do on that. If this were a recent production amp with lead-free solder, I'd definitely have to add some flux or add some fresh leaded solder to the joint before doing this. But since this is 1978, this stuff should be regular solder. I'll see if I can show one from the top side. So heating up and just pushes straight down. And it just comes out. And you can see that little hook there. That would have torn the heck out of that pad if I'd let it. So let's do that. I'm going to get the easy ones out first, and then I'll get the ones that I'm going to have to snip. And because of the prep work and thinking about the problem in terms of a solution and being aware of the mechanical construction, once all that's in place, these things come out pretty easily. He said as this one begins to give trouble. The issue here is that this diode here, as you can see it rotated, shares a solder joint with the end of that diode I just took out. Now, I'll just go down here to these caps, being mindful of the wires beneath. And I'm sorry, I can't really show this very easily. I'll try here. Let's see if I can get the camera at a better angle and the right focus for you. I guess that's pretty good. Making sure I don't burn these wires. I'm going down here and I'm going to heat up this cap, push it down. This cap, push it down. This diode and push it down. This one. And this one. All right. Now I can get in here with the flush cutters, cut off those bent ends. And I try to capture the little bits that come off. And if, I see I dropped that one. Let's see if this tool is good for that too. No, not everything's ferrous. All right. Anyway, you don't want to have little stray snippets of stuff in your amp. So try to get them to stay in the snipper, like this one did, as I drop it right on camera. Or just if it goes in the chassis, like that one did, I'm about to track it down and remove it while I'm thinking about it. Because if that were to, say, find its way into an output socket and wedge itself in such a way that pin 2 and pin 3 were being bridged by that little snippet of of metal, bad things could happen. So far, this one has a little solder, this one has a little solder sticking to it. I can pull those out, but let me find where that snippet went while I'm thinking about it. Aha. It's right over here by the cathode for now. So, how is it that it wouldn't stick to the magnet, but it sticks to that? Okay. That could have blown things up real good. All right, now I can get this cap out. And this diode here. And I'll get that diode that fell. Let's see here. People like the long form videos, I'm told, so here's one of them for you. Trying to straighten it. I don't want to have a bend up top that does as much damage as the bend on the bottom I'm trying to avoid, so. That one just fell down from its neighbor having been desoldered. So that's good. Camera really is not in a good place for my work. Let's see if I can get you better focus for this though. This kind of stuff is boring for a lot of people, but I tell you what, if I could have seen someone do this in this detail 20 years ago, I would have leapfrogged ahead in my skills. That's one of the reasons I like to do this. I have learned a lot of tricks over the years. I don't have an apprentice, can't afford an apprentice, and I'm not temperamentally suited to have an apprentice. But if I get hit by a bus, not everything I've learned has gone to waste. Someone else will say, oh, he was pretty good. I learned a lot. If only he had realized X, Y, and Z, he could have been as good as I have actually, as the next guy becomes. Everyone gets better. Everyone's standing on the shoulder of giants. That's how cultures and civilizations progress. Back when cultures and civilizations thought it might be nice to progress for things to get better. I'm still a hopeful idiot. All right, I'm not just going to start jamming new stuff in there. I want to get all the old solder off those pads down there. Let's see if I can show that a little bit. It's a tricky angle. That's pretty good, I guess. Let's see. All right. Not a lot of science to this, just kind of trying to hold it in place, the desoldering braid. And this is really nice stuff. I've got it in the video descriptions for all the videos, what I use for this stuff. And trying to hold it against the old solder and not touch the wires near it, which is easier said than done sometimes. Getting it positioned is tricky, but then using it is fast. Now, someone changed these caps before, and this pad's a little messed up. This one's pretty good. This one's messed up. I'll be able to make it work better. Let's see if I can show you guys in just a minute. Let's see what's being shown here. This pad right here, it's got half the pad missing, but there's some good joints here. So when I put that cap in, I'm gonna bring its lead over here to attach to the little bit of solder pad left here, but these still undisturbed joints here. And that's what I don't like to have to do. But when the damage was done previously, that's my only option. Either that or I make a new one of these boards in a bathtub or something, and I'm not gonna be doing that. Let me get back to the view here, which I think will be better for you guys in just a minute. Let's see. I think there's some solder left on that one. You want to make sure you get all the old solder out, but you don't want to overheat things. It's a tricky little heat ballet. I'm working at 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and I've got a small chisel tip. So I can use just a little bitty edge of it for a small thing, or I can use the flat if I want to really heat something up fast. But I've got a lot of control. I can be pretty precise. And this stuff comes up pretty fast at this temperature. Sometimes I find the best way to get this stuff positioned where I want it to be is to do a little loop. It seems to have more strength when I do it that way. Let's see. Make sure I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. And you gotta kind of rotate the loop around a bit to get fresh. This is one of the trickier jobs I regularly do, just because of all the very meltable wires that are helpfully being in the way the whole time. Having the camera here honestly slows me down a lot too, but I figure, you know, I need to show this kind of stuff from time to time. Let's see if I can get in there. Yeah. There's these 3 wires here that are making this next one a little bit tricky. Good. All right. Let me get my 5 diodes and 2 caps prepped, and we'll put them back in place. Now, these diodes have a 15mm spacing, and I've got a lead spacing tool that's SAE, Imperial. In theory, if I had the right metric one, I could find the one that's like 14.5 and have everything perfect. But I found over time that sometimes just eyeballing it works. Most of the time, all right, I'm not quite enough on that one. So the first one is always a little bit of a game, and then you get a sense for it, of where they need to be. And I'm not bending them on camera because I need to have them up close to my eyes to be able to see. But I'll show you the gist of it. I know this is riveting to watch. That looks about right. You want them to be more or less centered, as close as you can get. Electronically, it doesn't matter, but attention to detail does tend to matter. All right, that's a nice fit. So now I know just past where my eye thinks it ought to be is where it ought to be, which means now my eye knows where it ought to be. And as always with these things, you have to watch the orientation. So this bias one, the band needs to be on this end. On all the other 4, the band has to be the opposite way. And getting it to go in that nicely, that's why we take the solder out, the old solder out from the other side first. Now I like to have a little tiny bit of an air gap between the diode and the board. And that little arc that my thumbnail puts in the bend does a good job of that. And I like, because it's not exactly perfect, but it's close enough that it just... Sorry, I had to take a phone call, business related. I don't remember what I was saying, but anyway, I like having that little bit of an air gap beneath them. Installing them left-handed like this is tricky. I just don't want you to be seeing this for the whole video. And if I put the camera on the other side so I can work right-handed, the camera blocks the light. So we all do what we can do. Now I like to solder these before I add these, because if this is in place and this is in place, then I've just got a forest of tree trunks to solder around in there. So makes it much easier to distinguish as I work. Then I will snip off the excess and then do the others. If you do it a different way, I'm sure that's fine. I'm not trying to say that mine is the only way, mine is the only true path. But it has saved me a lot of headache in the past. And I know you're not going to see all this because of camera limitations and such. And on these, because there's very little mass, I don't find it necessary to bend the leads over. Neither did Marshall back in 1978. And it's a bit tricky on these two that I just did, because I want to make sure that the solder that I apply to those two is sufficient and good, but that I'm not putting a big pool there that will block the holes in the pads that the next diodes here need to go into. I saw someone leave a comment on one of my videos the other day This is a Fender reissue amp, Deluxe Reverb or whatever, where I was replacing the filter caps. And they said that I soldered much too fast. And due respect, I'm working very hot with a very efficient iron. Getting that other snippet out. And I'm working at exactly the right speed for the materials necessary, especially with these thin traces and pads that you get on, you know, a Fender reissue Deluxe Reverb board, or in this case a 78 Marshall, which are built much the same way. They are not optimal PCBs, but with a little care, they work. But excess heat is the enemy. So I'm working very hot, which means I don't need to leave it on there very, very long. And none of my joints fail. Sorry, it's hard to work in these close quarters sometimes. Come on. And it's hard to see maybe, but I'm heating up both the lead and the pad before bringing the solder to it. So I'm not just painting solder in place, though it may look like that because sometimes it runs down and I got to push it back up. But I don't want to desolder more things from this board so I can get the thing more up. I'm just forcing myself to go to the work. All right, the trickiest ones are now done. Sometimes I'll let it cool a bit and go back just to make sure there are no gaps or bubbles. That's good. As I hit the camera stand with a soldering iron. All right, snipped off 3, so I bring 1, 2, and 3 out. All right, I'll do these other 2 diodes while my brain still has that kind of muscle memory for getting the bin right. Oh, I remember what I was going to say before I take that phone call. I like for the diode value to be visible, so I have the 4007 pointing up on all of them. People can see the N as if they don't know that. But it doesn't matter in this case if it's a UF 4000N or a 1N, sorry, UF 4007 or a 1N 4007. Both kind of work just fine. If you like the ultra fast, or if you like the Freds, go for it. Fast recovery diodes. I have not found that it makes any difference. And these 1N 4007s are what the amp had originally. But this way, if a tech ever needs to look at this amp down the road, they will see, oh, okay, he used 1N 4007s. They won't have to lift a diode to read what was in there. What if there's a problem and he thinks it might be a bad diode? He needs to make sure that I use the right diodes. And if you can't see the value, you know, so this saves someone potentially 10 minutes worth of work just to say, okay, so 1N 4007 is measured good on the meter. That's probably not the problem because they'll know what the current handling and the voltage handling is, because they'll know what type it is. I think I might be a little bit guilty right now of talking just to fill space. Yesterday's video showing all the things I did on that 65 the Deluxe Reverb. I had a big section where I was showing stuff on the screen and I had some graphics popping up to tell you what components I had either fully removed or lifted and fully resoldered in either case. But I had run out of things to say when I was doing the voiceover narration. And felt like there was just a dead spot in the middle of the video. I guess we're just used to having constant information given to us these days and quiet. is unsettling. I admit I get tired of the sound of my own voice in these things, dulcet though it may be reputed to be. Let's see. Okay, so this is a Vishay 10 microfarad 100-volt cap. I prefer to use a 160, but they were out, and 100 is more than sufficient. So just the 160s, you have a little extra headroom. But this is better than most stock caps. And again, just kind of eyeballing the curve. They're pretty long, so make sure it goes through each hole. I didn't have any solder blocking it. Do the same thing with this one. And again, I like to have the value facing up, so when the next tech goes in there, sees what was done in the amp, they can look at that and say, oh yeah, 10 microfarad, 100 volt. The actual bias voltage present will be typically -60 at its max. So 100 volts is still nice. A bit of headroom. But a 63 volt cap, I think, would be insufficient for peace of mind, even if you only ever had 50 volts present on it. All right. Now these I am going to bend because they do, while they're not very high mass caps, they do have some mass. And there's that one joint there where the previous tech had kind of botched it on the, I'm going to say the negative end of this cap in terms of the cap polarity, but it's where the bias is. So I want to make sure that I have good mechanical support for all this stuff since I'm going to be reinforcing a trace. Let's see if I can do this with the camera here. So I like to bend it up and like that. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see. So it's coming straight up, then down. That lets me give a good mechanical connection. And then on those, let's see, cap lifted up a little bit. Need to recreate this one because the cap lifted off the board. Because I was thinking about the camera angle. There we go. Go ahead and snip the excess on that before I solder, because I know that if I solder it and don't wait a minute to snip it, I could stress that joint for mechanical shock before it's all the way set up. And I just prefer to do it this way. So it's cut before I solder. You can do it after. You just might want to give it some time to really cool before you cut it. It's also less to heat up when I'm making the solder joint now because there's less raw material there. Let's see how those look. Really good and neat. And because the trace and the pad is kind of flimsy on these, that extra hook that I put in there, it takes a lot of stress or potential stress off of that. Oh, I forgot to solder those last two diodes. I need to do that before I can access the cap connections. Derper. I work much faster when not filming. Because I'm only thinking about the job at hand. But I haven't had a long, detailed video up in a while, so the client will not be billed for the extra time the video adds. Two wires snipped. 2 bits of lead out. Good to keep track of that. All right, now here, I want to bend this one down at that kind of angle. And this one, I want to bring over right between these other 2 solder joints. So I can do this like that. I can do this without burning this orange wire that keeps volunteering to be in the way. Press it against it. All right, let's see how this goes. In this case, I'm going to solder it before I snip it. Get it well connected there to the remnants of that solder pad. Then risk burning my finger here. Tie into these joints. Oh, that's warm. All right, let's get a tool. I've got calluses on my calluses, and I deal with a lot of high heat. I burn myself quite knowingly a lot of the time, and I can put up with a lot of stuff, but that short lead there got mega hot. I don't really like branding myself on camera. All right, solder that. Other lead, if I can get to it. Inspect it. That one looks pretty. This one is a necessary evil due to that semi-destroyed pad from the previous tech, who had not seen my video on snipping the leads so that you don't have any hooks that you're pulling out. It happens. It's a lot better than that 76 super lead. I think that 76 super lead should be required viewing for all would-be Marshall techs. Cautionary tale of what not to do. It's on my channel under the Vintage Marshalls playlist. But someone had managed to damage every single trace, every single pad, leave everything coated in flux. Notice the almost complete absence of flux here on the bottom. But I'm still going to go back here now and clean that up. But I mean, they just had big puddles of brown flux caked everywhere. And over time, that can cause conductive paths to form. He said, looking for his little scrap of paper towel. So it doesn't take a lot to take care of this. Some isopropyl on a paper towel. If it were a real buildup, if this were an old amp, it had a whole bunch of flux, I would apply the isopropyl to the board directly and use a soft bristle toothbrush. I'm just kind of patting it. That'll get the little bits off. I didn't leave any real puddles. So that's clean as factory, and you can see little bits of flux residue. Just little brownish orange bits, but that's pretty normal. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. It doesn't take long to clean up after yourself, people. All right, so now what have we done here? We have new diodes. So the 4 in the bias all have the bands going to this direction, and the 1 in the bias has its band going in this direction. So we'll have a negative voltage here, which is what we want. We'll have a positive voltage here, which is what we want. And because there's a negative voltage on each of these filter caps in the bias supply, the negative end of the cap is at the negative voltage connection, and the positive end of the cap, in terms of the cap's polarity, is to ground. And that's all good, and it's all nice and neat, and as pretty as any factory Marshall ever was. So that's a nice place to be. Now I'm going to turn my attention to these pots and what's happening on the back of them, and what we can do, especially on this presence pot. All right, I've put the board onto the standoff, so I have a flat surface here to work on. And I'm gonna get some of the solder out of these little eyelets here from where it was looped around the, that one's pretty good. Looped around the bus wire. See if I can get that little bit to just come out without any force. Kind of fragile, you just kind of use a little finesse, a little nuance, a lot of hoping. Let's see if I can support that way. I just want to push that down just the slightest bit if I can. It really wants to be in there. I don't want to overheat the resistor. Let's see. Let's see if I can open this one up while that resistor cools. Sometimes just pressing with this dental pick will open these up nicely. So I can get a flathead screwdriver in there and continue to undo that loop, because I don't want to cut off the original material in case this ever needs to be put back for some insane collector who wants everything the way it was rather than the better way it came to them. It's a weird market. Maybe if I could wedge this in here. Not really. I think we just got a wide flat spot on top of that. That's keeping it from falling out. Let's see. What I'm doing is kind of insane, as I know I have excess here. I could just trim off, but I am trying to keep the original bits original for just to make it put backable. It's not always easy. Let's see. The main thing is just really hard to get these any mechanical support. And I want to do no harm. Maybe if I can get in there with the solder desucker, I can get that out now. Not desucker, but the braid. I've got a really nice solder sucker, but I think this is the better way to go, if I can get it to go. I'm being really gentle because I've got that purple wire. There it goes. That I don't want to burn by accident. And I don't want to put too much flex on the flat terminals or anything. Let's see. Let's see here. Let's see if this works. A little bit. Getting started is the trick, because there's not a lot of leverage without using crazy force. Let's see. This one is so close. It may not work. Let's see. There it goes. That one's open. And this one's just about open. All right, great. A lot of work for something few people will notice, but if any tech is ever tasked with putting this back together with a bus wire, I think it's a bad idea. I understand why some collector would want to do it. It is now possible. So I'm straightening out those areas without affecting the lead as it attaches to the body of the component. All the stress I've been inducing has only been on the very end here of these leads. So the component's not been stressed, and the junction to the cap body is, sorry, the pot body or terminals has not been stressed. Let's see. Aha! There we go. I'll just flatten those out a bit. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some nice loops so they attach to the back of this pot instead of to the bus wire. So I'm going to get that old solder off real fast. Waiting for the meter to beep. Let's see if I get that pressed up against something. Usually I do this with it back in it attached to the front panel, but I thought it'd be easier to show you guys here. Turns out I was wrong, but anyway, this is going to work. The reason I like to get that old flux out is because any dirt and stuff that's on the surface as solder has been applied over the years works its way into it. I just want to know that the only things I'm working with are clean. This is a lot easier when it's attached to the front panel, I'll tell you what. Well, I've got a workaround for that. Get my solder spool, put the pot in there, raise this up, double check the focus. All right, let's do this. That's good. I know that that is cleaned and tinned. Now I'll take a little bit of isopropyl, get all that old flux off. And believe it or not, this is actually working pretty fast. I will not have done any damage to this pot from this. But I'm going to let it cool off a bit before I reattach. I just want to have a nice clean surface. Well, I have that like that. Let me get a screwdriver. Give myself a nice angle for a nice curve for each of these things. Using the screwdriver like this means I've got the same bend. It'll be consistent and look nice. If I can put the screwdriver back with my left hand, which means that I can have them go on the back of the pot like this. It'll be nice and neat and secure, but that old length is still there. It can be put back and rebus wired down the road should that sad fate come to pass. introduced a little extra flux there I didn't want. It's not as pretty as if I were to do a build from scratch. So I have very just small, nicely domed solder joints for each connection. See the connection, the grounds on that Yamaha RevStar wiring, for example, is what I'm talking about with the little individual dome connections. But that's going to be very rock solid and can be put back to 1978. Should be wanted. And now that looks pretty good. Let me just give it a nice look from the front. Boy, that's warm. Okay. That'll be good. Now I'm going to put everything back in a minute. First thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to go through here with some isopropyl and clean the surfaces of all the pots and the bushings and the inside of the chassis where the pots connect, and get the new toothed washers like I talked about. But I'm about to end this video here because it's already very long and very detailed, and these things do take a while to edit. But while I have the mids pot out, remember from the previous video, hopefully you remember, get a better view of it. While I have this mids pot out, remember as the pot was turned, the middle wiper was moving back and forth. Not as much as it was, it's not as much now as it was, but I think I can crimp that even better still. So let me see what I can do here. From this angle. Yeah, it's just riding up. It's almost imperceptible here where the crimp is, but it sure is still moving. Though again, not as much as it was. There we go. It's it's still got a little bit of movement, but it's a lot better. I'm much less concerned that that's going to separate from its track. We could always replace the pot if necessary. It's just one pot among 6, but let's see how it does. And next time you see this, I'll have cleaned up all these solder joints and reconnected some stuff, and I'll explain that then. But in terms of the step-by-step detail, I think we're going to end this one here for now. So thanks for understanding, and thanks for watching.